Cracklings! So it was recently recommended to me that I do a list of my favorite Canadian horror films, and seeing as I like a lot of horror films from Canada, they seem to put out awesome stuff, I figured I would take up on that suggestion. So this is just kind of a highlight list. There have actually been a lot of good horror movies that have come out of Canada, not necessarily all of them that I've seen, and then there are some that are kind of like a little too off the beaten path, too indie, too whatever. And there's a handful that I own and a handful that I don't that I will recommend. To start, I've talked about this movie quite a bit before. It's one of the foundations of the slasher genre. It's definitely a classic with a lot more to it than it would look, which is Black Christmas, which is, I will forever, ever find it funny that the guy who directed this went on a few years later to direct A Christmas Story, and that parallel will always be funny to me. The remake for this is pretty terrible, but the original is really good and really worth it. Next one I recommend is, on this half, is Deranged, which is going off of the same story that inspired Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So Ed Gein was the inspiration for this story. I haven't seen it in a while, so I don't remember it very well, but it is one that I recommend as well. Another one, which I heard about in my little 101 Horror Movies You Must See Before You Die book, is Death Dream, which is about a Vietnam soldier that returns home and he's not really the same, especially because his whole family thought he was dead, and then he's kind of like, ooh, and then things go awry. That's definitely a really good one to look into from 1974. It's kind of a trip, but definitely worth the watch. Another one which is kind of a classic, and I know a lot of people have heard of this one. I haven't actually seen it because I never really cared, which is Prom Night, which is filmed and produced in Canada with Jamie Lee Curtis. So I figured I'd throw that on the list because even though I haven't seen it, everybody knows what that movie is. It's kind of a staple within the slasher genre. Another kind of odd one, which I get a kick out of, it's a little like sci-fi horror, is The Gate, which has a little demon things coming from another dimension. You've probably heard about it. It's kind of a cult favorite. I do highly recommend that. Hot Mess from '87. Another one which I just watched more recently and also do not have a copy of is Cube. For a film that has one set the whole time and it's primarily dialogue, it's a pretty solid little mind puzzle and definitely worth watching. I wouldn't call it the greatest sci-fi horror, suspense, whatever, but I definitely got a lot of a kick out of it. It was really interesting. Another great one from 1980 that I accidentally sort of skipped over is The Changeling. I hadn't heard of this film until there was a retrospective on it, and I think Rue Morgue, and it's a very solid, interesting little ghost story. Well acted and written, directed, and everything. It's a little bit on the slower side, but it's definitely worth looking into. My Bloody Valentine is another one. Not April Fool's Day. I actually thought that movie was really dumb, but the original My Bloody Valentine is from Nova Scotia and is quite a bit different than the 2009 remake, which I do get a kick out of that one, but the original is very different, and there's a lot of great little slasher things in here. It's kind of a hot mess, but definitely worth the watch. So I figured I would bring that one out. And then one I absolutely cannot recommend enough, I bring this one up a lot, is Ginger Snaps. This is my favorite werewolf movie. Yes, it even edges out American Werewolf in London, if only just. But the script and Catherine Isabel's performance are fantastic, and I really do want everybody out there to see this movie. The sequels are negligible. I don't really recommend those. I'll watch them because I'll watch bad movies, but I don't recommend them as much as I recommend the first one because it's really worth it, and Catherine Isabel is wonderful. Another great one is Fido. I don't know if I've talked about this one before, but I probably have. This is one of the more interesting, original, weird zombie films I've seen, which is this sort of like 50s looking community just survive the zombie apocalypse by barricading all the zombies out and then using them as like domesticated servants with the shock collar things. It's really weird, but it's really funny and definitely worth checking into. Another great one, and it's kind of like a radio play, and it's super underrated, and I just barely got around to ordering a copy, mostly so I can show it to everybody, is Pontypool, which I believe is from Montreal, and it's kind of interesting because it's another really original zombie film that has to do with the virus being passed around like by word of mouth, like certain word repetition combinations. It's really strange. And I kind of want to watch it again so I could understand it a little bit better because I was slightly confused, but it was really good. I do recommend that one a lot too. Another one is Haunter, which has Abigail Breslin in it. And this one, it's not the greatest, but I just thought the concept was really interesting, which was this family is in a time loop in like the mid-80s, and then the daughter, the teenage daughter, just kind of has to stop and be like, wait, what the fuck? And realizes that they are in fact in a time loop, and she's under the impression that their house is haunted when that isn't exactly the case. It's definitely an original idea, even if the execution's a little bit shaky. We can't have everything, so I don't judge too hard. So that one's definitely worth checking into. I believe it's still on Netflix. Another one I cannot recommend enough. I speak highly of this film a lot. Also, the Soska sisters, who wrote and directed and starred in this, are fucking awesome, and I highly recommend them. For that matter, I also do recommend checking into their other stuff, such as Dead Hooker and Trunk and See No Evil 2, because they are total sweethearts. And even though I don't watch reality television, I suppose I'll recommend Elevator, even though I haven't had it in me to watch it. This is about a young med student who gets disillusioned with the medical world after traumatizing events and gets into the world of body modification, which is usually under the table and very dark. It's definitely worth looking into. There is a scene of a very sensitive nature in there, so please do keep that in mind if you have some PTSD or something, but this is still a great film. Another one, and this one is super, super, super ridiculous, and intentionally so, is Wolf Cop, which is from like central like Moose Jaw, Canada, and this one is ridiculous. And I knew that going in because it kind of set itself up as like a camp cult horror off the gate, which is a drunk cop. Turns out to be he's a better cop when he's a werewolf. And then there's a whole big plot about controlling werewolves and town elders and all this stuff that I won't really go into to spoil it, but please watch it. It's violent and dumb and hilarious and totally worth it. The last one on here, which is not as horror so much as like dystopian action flick, is Turbo Kid from 2015. And this is kind of a really weird one in that it's taking all these like weird, it's like if the 1980s thought the 90s was the future kind of thing. So it's got all these like weird little video game nods and a lot of very hokey, silly things. It's really interesting. Or maybe it's like the 1990s version of the future. I don't know. It's kind of a trip. It's entertaining. It's not the best, but it's definitely really worth watching, and I do recommend it. So that's all I got for today. Hopefully you will check into some great Canadian films. Give some love to Rue Morgue magazine, which is a Toronto original. And keep an eye on stuff that comes out of the Toronto International Film Festival. Till next time, Darklings.